Yo, how are you doing, folks? Welcome to episode 72 of the Simpa Life podcast. Another week has passed. It is getting warmer. It is getting brighter. I cannot wait for spring and summer to be here so we can all get outside and get enjoying our gardens, both legal ones and illegal ones. You know what I'm talking about, you fine folk out there. It is almost a guerrilla growing season. And I suppose that's quite a good segue onto our guest today. Somewhat of a growing aficionado that has quite recently been entangled with local constabulary for cultivating his own and producing sort of his own oils, tinctures, and general sort of products. He is a former MOD contractor, cannabis activist that has worked with many UK cannabis law reform organisations, including Teesside Cannabis Club, Durham City Cannabis Club, Seed Our Future, Bud Buddies, and others. He was recently, unfortunately, convicted for, as I said, cultivating his own cannabis, despite his best efforts, his knowledge and experience. So we've invited him on today to discuss this. He is Mr. Trev Coleman. How are you doing, brother?
Not so bad, young, and how's yourself?
I am good. Like I said, it's getting brighter. It's getting warmer. I was out in just one. Yeah, I was out in just one. Indeed. The past couple of days, I think we've nearly touched double figures as well, which for the north at this time of year is a rarity. Some years, other years we've actually had heat waves in March. But it doesn't look like we're going to have one this year.
No, it's a proper spring day out there. It's quite nice. I'm quite happy with this.
Yeah, I'm happy with it. Like I say, I was saying before in the intro, with guerrilla growing season, everyone's sort of popping and prepping. I've seen a few of the pages that I follow online, getting their plants ready indoors, and I love this time of year for watching everything grow, not just cannabis, obviously, but just watching the colors, watching the change. It's something intrinsic into the spirit, just lightens up. Do you know what I mean? You just get that.
Inside, I was just standing out the back there, looking and noticing that my chives were coming up again, and thinking I need to get some more out there. My parsley's all blooming, and I need to get out and get some new herbs on the go.
For sure. Obviously, you're, like I said, quite an aficionado, I would say, of cultivating herbs. This quite recently got you into some trouble. So do you want to tell us a bit about it?
It did. Right. Last January, 4 guys decided that they wanted to try to break into the house at a time when I was pretty much crippled with quite a serious spinal issue at the time. And me, being a daft sod, panicked and ended up calling the police. And the police, instead of going after the 4 little scroats that were trying to break into the house, decided that they were going to bust me. So they busted us for growing 75 plants, and I've recently gone through the whole process. And to be honest, it has really, really shocked us, because we all think that if we commit a crime, then we're going to get a fair trial. We can put in counter evidence, we can counter the claims of the Crown and all the rest of it, but that system doesn't work that way. You don't get a fair trial. It's absolutely disgusting. I mean, it just... with Seed Our Future, what we did was we sent FOIs in, Freedom of Information requests, to every single force in the country, asking 3 questions. We wanted evidence for the claim that cannabis meets the criteria for a Schedule 1 substance. We also wanted evidence for the claim of control and evidence for what misuse constitutes. Now, hundreds of people had to do this, got involved with this, so everybody's seen it. There was literally FOIs coming in from every force in the country to say that none of them could produce this evidence. On top of that, there was the Crown Prosecution Service. There was an FOI put into them, and they're saying that they can't produce this evidence. The Home Office have said that the evidence used to enact the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971 was destroyed. Now, my whole defence has always been that there's no evidence to back up any of the claims made within the charges. That has all been confirmed multiple times by multiple legal types. It's been confirmed. It's actually been mentioned in Parliament twice since my bust by Crispin Blunt. He's turned around and said that there simply is no evidence to back up the scheduling and that it's all founded in the racist American policing of the 1950s, which makes it obviously a breach of the enforcement of that legislation, a breach of the Terrorism Act. Now, all of this has all been confirmed multiple times. Even the barrister I was using confirmed the terrorism angle. He gave us pointers on strengthening the case, a whole lot. Every bit of evidence that has been compiled by everybody involved with CEDAW, Future and various others, all put in, all deemed inadmissible. How can, if all of this, how are we supposed to get a fair trial here? Now, when it came to the day of my trial, my barrister decided that he wasn't going to represent us and putting somebody else in there at the last minute. Somebody who hadn't gone through my case properly and all the rest of it. Mm-hmm. Now, in the week since me and you last went to court with him, I've been sending various bits and pieces in, and this lady has been going through it all. And even she admitted that I was effectively the expert on the subject matter expert there. Mm-hmm. She even said, "Why don't you go off and do this somewhere else?" But at the end of it, she was saying, "Look, a judge will direct the jury to convict you on this particular point, in which point you're going down for 6 years." Mm-hmm. And like, I will admit, I dropped my arse at that point. 6 years, you have no laugh, but there's nothing to back all of this up. I'm not getting a fair trial, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't matter, they're going to send you down. Unless you plead guilty, they're going to send you down. All right, okay, fair enough. And so basically, I'm not going, no matter what, I'm going to get convicted. You know, I'm not going to get a fair trial, nothing. As soon as a cop says, you committed a crime, that's it. Pretty much, yeah, that is the script. Mm-hmm. Even the Crown prosecution lawyer was talking about how arrogant I was because I seemed to have a knowledge of international law. I was like, yeah, because I've sat and done all the homework and all of this. It's not just me that's confirmed this. I mean, there's been multiple legal types, right? Even Outlaw's defense documents, I've gone through that, and he's picked up a lot of stuff like on the terrorism angle and all the rest of it. Even his people are confirming all of this. Mm-hmm. If this is all being confirmed multiple times, why aren't these judges taking notice of this? I genuinely don't understand it. But until you actually get in, the only way you can make it understandable is to get into the economics of it, which me and you have talked about multiple times. Mm.
Sorry, I was just quickly trying to Google there the term that we learned. The term that we learned when we spoke to the barrister, the appearance in court that you had prior to ultimately your conviction, in which basically we were told that since the 1960s, it's not been possible in the UK as a challenge and defense to a law to challenge. Sorry, it's not been a defense to challenge a law. So all evidence that was correlated to compendium, as was reported by the barrister in the courtroom at the time, was inadmissible because the way that acts and legislative law works in the UK is it's basically kind of a strict liability thing. It was with cannabis. Is it cannabis? Unfortunately, in an interview, you said it was cannabis, but contested that it wasn't cannabis as is scheduled for under the misuse of drugs regulations. Uh-huh. In their eyes, you've said cannabis, therefore it's cannabis. So even when you challenged and asked them to go away and prove it was cannabis, they came back and proved it was cannabis by stating that it was cannabis effectively.
Yeah, I mean, their expert, right? Their expert witness apparently had confirmed through sight and smell. If that's the limit of his expertise, he's no better than a sniffer dog.
But again, that's what the law says. It's about minimum criteria for meeting the qualification of criminality. And in that instance, cannabis is illegal, it's unlawful without license or without strict controls. You didn't meet the criteria for the controls. So therefore, in their eyes, everything else meets this other criteria. Whereas what you presented was such an anomaly to them that you went, no, there's cannabis, the plant, that isn't this drug, that isn't this thing that you've created to be. There is just this naturally occurring thing that has been here for millennia and will be for millennia more. And if I think it was procedural issues that kind of got you into the position that you were in terms of sorry, go on.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of the point that the barrister was making to us. It was like, if we go to trial and get in front of a jury, it was weird because she was going on like, a judge is going to direct the jury to convict you on this particular point. Whilst at the same time saying a jury is never going to understand your technicalities.
It's the judge will not allow the jury the time to understand the defense. And this is what we saw. It was very disheartening. I mean, it was interesting that I wasn't ushered out. Obviously, I'll say in full disclosure here, I've been to court a few times with Trev since his arrest last January, just as a support. Obviously, no legal capacity. I have no training. I have no qualifications. Just sort of accumulation of experience in this, just trying to observe and figure out what's happening. And it seems that it is, as Trev is stating, a fixed game in that we cannot present a counter alternative. It's legally not possible since this, I don't want to say it's Coulson, but I can't remember the name of it. It began with a C. It was in the 1960s, and it was basically a trial precedent that was set that basically meant that no longer could you bring up and challenge the nature of a law as a defense for it. If you broke that law, that's fine. You're then either found guilty or not guilty of it. If you want to challenge the law, you have to do that outside of that arena of defense. And so I think that's what the misconception has been in a lot of people in this country, is that, wait, no, the law is an arse and I have broken it. They're then still stating, you've admitted you broke the law though. And that it's the semantics of it. And this is where they're hanging us. So it's trying to learn, as we discussed in the Outlaw episode, the language of nullification, of understanding that with, I don't want to say a script, but maybe with a bit more of an understanding of how to say and what not to say and what to say, you could have still rang the police there and had their protection, as it were, but not then maybe being as vulnerable to prosecution. Because again, you were, as you always said you would do, you immediately went, no, I'm going to challenge this. From the moment they walked into your house to the moment they kicked you out of that station, you told the fucking truth. And that's what hurt your case, because we were led to believe as citizens of this country that truth trounces power, it trounces lies, it trounces corruption and greed. But it doesn't for us. we're not an art.
It doesn't even at the top levels. Look at what happened to Corbyn. He was completely honest, forthright, truthful in everything that he did, and he still got shafted.
Yeah, very true.
So it almost seems like in this country, if you're honest, then you're going to end up getting shafted.
What is it? The Orwell quote? Something when the world moves away from the truth, it will learn to hate those that speak it. Do you know what I mean? That's a butchery of it. That's not the quote, but it's something along to those lines, that our world has become so false and facadical, if that's even a term. It sounds very nautical when it came into my head there. That anyone that is genuine and truthful and honest, that's a threat, because it holds a mirror to the lies and the dishonesty of the systems and the people that operate within it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Having a Blofeld moment there.
Always. He's going to be the star of the show, I'm telling you, man. It'll be the Neo Cat show. Probably get more views than me, to be fair, just watching him for a couple of hours. But yes, I'll include, obviously you were on March 21, so March of last year, in episode 20, which I'll include below so people can get more of a background on the case. But could you give us sort of an idea of what, is it where they caught you with, they charged you with, and what the outcome was in terms of the prosecution?
Production, there was two charges. There was production, possession with intent to supply, 75 cannabis plants. I got, instead of getting sent down for 6 years, I got 18 months suspended for 2 years. And a £156 fine, which is like a week's worth of benefits, which is fucking.
So yeah, exactly that. It fucks you for such a long period of time. Just take the fine for a moment, but then you consider the pageantry how much did it cost that security guard that led you in? How much did it cost the CPS to be there, the judge to be there, your barrister to be there, the lights to be put on in that building, the guys at the metal detector at the front, the security dudes that appeared to walk around and just look intimidating? Do you know, the pageantry of all of that? How much did that cost for the outcome to be literally, you say you're wrong and you get a little fine and behave for 2 years and you're fine. Or we'll put you incarcerated for 6 years. You've done the calculations of this cost. What is it? It's nearly 100 grand for the first year and then like 50 grand afterwards.
It's £65,000 to send somebody to jail and then £45,000 a year to keep them there. So it would have cost them 110 grand for the first year, then 45 grand a year after 90, 180, 235. So there's 350,000.
Because of one word. Exactly, the absurd. That's what's wrong with the entirety of this conversation. It's not about stopping you from doing whatever. It's not about you learning a lesson. It's about, will you kowtow down to our authority and to our faces admit the lie? That's all any of this is about. That's what even the checkpoint diversion schemes that are now in operation in like 9 or 10 constabularies are about. It's a lot. The people there know it. You know what I mean? You sit with them, same with your experience that you can speak of now with probation, and they've just been like, well, what do we do here? You know more than I do. I'm here to predicate a lie. You know I'm lying. I know I'm lying.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much got that. As you said, the lady from probation, she looked almost apologetic. I don't understand why you're here. It turned out her son, a 7-year-old son, suffers from IBD. So I ended up giving her a referral to a couple of CBD companies. Mm-hmm. Even the barrister was saying that I'm the subject matter expert. She knows I'm right, she knows the law's wrong, all the rest of it, but this is the way we do things. And it's literally everybody, as you've seen, ever since it's 1960, everybody's just following orders.
It's the way the system works, because again, and then to challenge it, is the amount of money that is necessary. I just had Phil Monk on in the previous episode, catching up with sort of WTU's work and what he's been sort of trying to do, and the cost that they were told of having to have the finances in return to be able to pay the legal fees of the government if you want to take the government to task for a law being corrupt and immoral. And that mechanism means that there is no justice for the poor. There cannot be any justice for the poor.
Well, exactly. I mean, when we had that conversation with Outlaw, he was talking about how he's keep trying to put the money forward for this judicial review, and he just keeps getting knocked back.
But they're currently trying to wind down judicial reviews. It's part of the Tory sort of plan to remove accountability.
Yeah, because they really don't want to be held accountable for their crimes at all. They want to take us back. They want us all to be serfs.
We live in a very interesting time. So I suppose without getting too maybe conspiratorial, if you look at the World Economic Forum and people like Boris and Trudeau and etc. all signed up to it, and the consequences, or what appear to be consequences of the pandemic. I'm trying not to use the C word, by the way, either the beer version of it or the scientific version of it. The virus that's just gone through humanity for the past couple of years.
All right.
Because that C word is having problems with people's channels and analytics, so I don't want to use it. But yeah, we're being told that what's happening economically around the world is a consequence of these pandemics and what has just happened. We're now seeing, obviously, studies that are coming out of quite respected institutions that are speculating that global lockdowns actually had a very marginal effect on spread and on death rates, but had a dramatic effect on global mental health in terms of anxiety, depression, massive increases in certain groups and across the board of suicidality and suicide ideation in individuals, especially the youth. It's crazy that we're being told this narrative, and it's not. It feels very much, in my opinion, that the World Economic Forum and other entities and organizations have set this global agenda. This is why Biden and Boris are both saying build back better. This is why the same slogans, the same campaigns, the same white papers are being produced in different economic nation states around the world. And it seems to be towards the creation of or one world governance.
Yeah, but that's all tinfoil hat and stuff. You just think it's all been like all over the various websites and everything else. It's just tinfoil hat. I mean, I don't understand people nowadays, mate. I mean, you can sit here, we can talk about these things because we can see them happening, and yet we will be regarded as wackos, to be honest.
We've been wackos before, but then we had a brief period. Remember last year where we were proven right for several things? I sat around your house, we had a cup of coffee together. We're like, we got that right. We really got that right. So I remember actually saying we are going back to the conspiracy again. Because I remember saying about my tinfoil hat that I started my videos with. I'm just going to need a new one because we're moving into a world where the majority of what was conspiracy during the height of these lockdowns and pandemic is now consensus science. And that's a little bit alarming for anyone that's actually paid some attention to the narrative of what's gone down for the past couple of years. That isn't to say that every absurd lie and narrative that's been put out there is true. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying a lot of the things that have been proliferated as conspiracies, things like the lab leak theory, etc., that were getting people removed from platforms and deplatformed, and now considered basically consensus by advisors in most of the developed world. As in government advisors.
I've noticed more and more of that. So Joe Rogan almost got himself cancelled over it, and Russell Brand's spoken about it, and I've not followed it that closely because, to be honest, over the last year, especially since this bust, I've discovered that ignorance really is bliss. Just be able to switch off from everything for a little while, because I think you've got to. Are you living in the world at the minute the way it is? I mean, we were, as we've just said, we'll realise just how badly corrupted it is. This is why the rich and powerful can't be held to account by us lot, and this is why we get led into wars of aggression. And I don't know, how do we solve those issues?
I think you and I would say one word: cannabis, because you can see that larger picture in terms of economic stimulation and end of resource scarcity and the global scarcity paradigm and disaster capitalism. Yeah,
that goes the biggest way towards it. Like for me, that's decentralization of power, and through that. And every bit of tech is out there to see for it right now. You've talked about that gravitas carbitura. Mm-hmm. And for me, that is by far the single most exciting cannabis project out there. That's we should be tapping into the Northern Powerhouse for that sort of thing.
Yeah. Exactly that. I mean, if the base model of that will obviously include this in the bio below, guys. That's what I was writing on my tiny little notepad there. This gravitas is carbitura. Carbitura, I always pronounce it wrong. The project of this is basically a giant sort of warehouse using carbon sequestration from the local environment, using polluted grey water, using then hydroponically grown low THC cultivars of cannabis to create biomass to then incinerate in a closed loop carbon system. It is, frankly, very exciting. And it's a scalable model. And they've basically, if you look at it, the worse an area you can put it, the more efficient it will be. The more polluting it is, the more toxic the waterways are. And that's only one part of it. That's using one application. If you'd have then, as me and Trevor spoke of, increase the cannabinoid expressions and profile of the plants, you can increase yield in terms of increasing biomass. You can have a wider exploration of actual biochemistry, so cannabinoids, terpenes, flavonoids, etc., that can be extracted before it goes to biomass.
That's a thing that not actually with gravitas, they're not actually flowering the plants. Mm-hmm. It's all just it's going so far. All been grown so far, and then just turned into biomass. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I've always hypothesized of using those hydroponically grown plants for seed production for biofuels. Mm-hmm. So plants like if you compare something like a hemp plant, a hemp plant grown 0.2% hemp plant grown in the wild, that'll produce was it 300 to 1,000 gallons of seed oil per acre? You get all of the other byproducts that go with it. You remove the THC cap, that acre of plants becomes 20 to 30 times more productive. Mm-hmm. If you get into hydroponics, you can increase that yield again by around 500%. So if we're going to be using these hydroponically grown plants, then we use those high THC plants for your biofuel production.
Yeah, and
I mean, it's all obvious if you understand the plant as a resource rather than just a drug.
Entirely. It's also then if you open up licensing and don't create restrictive industries so that you're only allowed to work on one part of the plant. But I mean, looking at then using that hypothetical model, as you say, the production of the chemical constituent components would be able to be extracted, as you say, then creating of bioethanols, which you could then use the bioethanols to actually, you could even burn them in, again, closed loop carbon systems using other cannabis plants to sequester that. And it becomes it's almost infinitum. It's truly scalable. And the idea of then we can still burn shit because we're still going to have to use sort of combustion for a little while until we move further with developments of, for all I don't like it, fusion. Again, we're a long way off things like the concepts of like 0 point energy, even though people like Tesla were fucking around with that way back when.
This gravitas gives you the opportunity to do all of that because your waste is biochar, which is your graphene.
Mm-hmm. But then the graphene production, like I said, into energy storage solutions. So then, you biochar, make them into the batteries. You then, create hubs and networks. And then the idea is, I mean, there's some really interesting projects I've seen recently. A guy was using vegetable waste and polymers to create solar panels.
Oh.
So they're getting really smart with understanding the basics of the science of how to store and convert kinetic energy into energy. And it's just the limitations of human ingenuity at this point is battery technology. Yeah, as you and I know, the future, frankly, as far as I'm concerned, is cannabis graphene supercapacitors.
Yeah, that's exactly what I see as well. I don't see anything that can surpass that right now.
No, I mean, there's obviously there's issues with scalability in terms of size, etc. But research and ingenuity comes from research and application. So it needs to be in the field. We need it to operate for you to be able to look at it and go, what if we do this? What if we change this? What if we modify this? And over time, the first DC electrics that we sort of came up with were incredibly dangerous. When electricity was first installed, it caused some shit. It still does in a lot of ways, actually, if it's not then sort of taken care of. But the idea of then being able to have cheap biodegradable batteries that can actually really store enough energy to run the lifetime of something isn't too far unfeasible, I don't think, using this kind of technology or this series of thoughts. Do you know what I mean? Like going down that road.
It really isn't. I mean, there's already studies out there to show that if you do bilayer graphene, so that's basically one layer of graphene on top of the other, parallel, but you put one of the layers just slightly 1 degree out, that allows you access to limitless clean energy. I can't remember the exact way it works, but apparently that magic angle opens up a hell of a lot of extra opportunities for like what's it called, the superconductive properties of graphene.
So is it because it creates? I'm trying to 3D think of it and map it in my head, and my brain is literally thinking of that scene in fucking in Interstellar.
Just do a quick Google, graphene magic angle.
Is that literally what it's called?
Yeah.
Because what I've got in my head is thinking, is it about then the storage capacity, basically the space in between?
Yeah, it's the space between the layers of graphene and the way the electrons move through it.
Oh. So it's moved at a 1.1 angle on the top layer, and it creates it's an unexpected topographical quantum state. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to. I'll include a link below, folks. So you can have a look at this. I'll reach out to one of my science mates actually, because I've been looking for an industrialist, someone that knows the real science of this, like batteries, etc., and about the polymers, etc. I really want on the show to be able to really discuss the true potentials under the knowledge of science today. Do you know what I mean? Graphene magic.
Chris Tasker might be a good one to reach out to for somebody for that.
Yeah, good point. Someone within his sphere would probably be really useful. Yeah. So actually, I can see it in my head that then if it's lattice, whereas then if it's opened up the angles, in my head the way I see the shape, there is more space. Therefore, if there's more space, the reason supercapacitors, especially the cannabis graphene ones or graphene in general, looks to be good is the structure of it molecularly, is it has the space to store the energy. But then, altering the angle, the image that it generates in my head would then, you could put more energy within it. So therefore, anything you can do to increase that that internalized space. I mean, that's what Tesla did when he figured out the internal aerial, the first modern design for an aerials. Which then later became obviously wireless technology. And it was based on the same sort of thing. If instead of creating external space, it's about finding internal space. And obviously there's quite a few, I can't think of the physicist offhand, but he says there's infinitely far more within than without. And he meant that on an atomic level, in that as soon as you break something open, there's just more shit.
And that's what CERN's all about.
Yeah, and obviously we're down to like quasarks and what is super quasarks or whatever else we're down to next, And again, next year they'll be like, oh, we found these other things, and then they'll go, but there's two more, and then inside that, there's two more.
I was just reading an article this morning about how they've just taken the first photo of quantum entanglement.
Wow. So how did they achieve this?
I can't remember. There's obviously some sort of fancy ass camera.
Damn, man. It's interesting. So if they can then prove beyond a theoretical state. I mean, they're already looking at quantum entanglement, as far as my limited knowledge to this realm of study, is quite intrinsic towards the next level of quantum computing.
I will presume so, yeah.
Because it's then moving into, we work in binary states, so the coding of the machines and technology and everything that we've worked on, and then quantum is not in binary. Everything is a 1 or a 0. In a quantum state, everything it could be a 1 or a 0 or both, or neither, or anything. Yeah, so it's even in that.
So you've got infinite possibilities.
So I can't quite. I feel like we're almost stumbling into the next level of science that I think a lot of people are just going to be, myself included, just, okay, we trust you. Go prove your things. Take your pictures, come back to us, and then we'll sit here and have our stoned conversations. But shit, we cannot grasp it.
Yeah, a lot of these quantum technologies, I think, are really going to transform the way we do things. It's some absolutely fascinating stuff right now. It actually gives us hope for the human race. And then I go out the door and it's a completely different matter.
Different matter. Good point. It's for my pun lovers out there. I see you guys. So the technology of cannabis that's what you and I end up talking about most, really, because it's interesting that the future of humanity is, as we like to speculate, this potential Star Trek future is based on and built from cannabis, and probably in some ways powered by psychedelic adventure and that kind of curiosity that's created by the consumption of compounds like cannabinoids and LSD, psilocybin, DMT, etc. Yeah. So again, as you're speaking of with hope there, it's interesting that cannabis is simultaneously, to some people, it is the devil's lettuce. It is the end all be all. The reason the world is the way it is because of drugs and drug people. And yet to others, it's the injustice, it's the wrong of why have you arbitrarily picked these handfuls of substances, thrown them into a list together, and then going to destroy the lives of people that interact with them. You could easily be in a reality where gravy is heroin and fucking broccoli is cannabis, or it is that arbitrary when you remove the moralization and the consequences of its criminalization.
No, just before we went the court last time together, and actually there was a report came out from the UN, which has been, they ended up the UN ended up not releasing it for some reason. I can't remember what, but the UN body who conducted it, they've made it open source. And it's basically how the drug war has opened up a raft of arbitrary detentions. So again, same sort of thing. I actually put that document in as part of my defense, along with the statements from Crispin Blunt and from all the stuff from See Our Future and everything else, all inadmissible.
Yeah, it's a frustrating thing to see firsthand, the failures of the system, the fallibility of it, the
fact that we're sitting here and we talk about how it's all arbitrary, and the UN have confirmed it's all arbitrary, but some people are just going to sit there and follow orders.
But yeah, at some point in the last century, as we said, with what happened in the UK with this, I don't want to say Coulson again, but that's the name that's resonating in my head with this moment of change in tact in the ability to use the questioning of a law is in defense. Then prior to that, it was about just getting enough people to go, well, this is wrong. Yeah, we changed that. This is wrong. Yeah, we changed that. Whereas I feel like the systems that have been created since the next LGBTQ plus movement won't get space for that. It doesn't feel like there isn't a new space for new acceptance. Do you know what I mean? The people have kind of got, we'll accept what was grandfathered in, but then legally we've now created space that if you're wrong, you're wrong. It doesn't matter if we're wrong for it. If the law says you're wrong, you're wrong. And it's this weird thing that the law has become above reproach, yet the people that enforce it and the people that fall foul of it are just people at the end of the day. It's weird. It's like, how do we ever question the law? Is it because there's still standing acts in Parliament now that are, I mean, what's the fucking the stupid thing? Like I'm a born Yorkshireman. I'm pretty sure I remember seeing not too long ago the law that states that a Yorkshireman can kill a Scotsman in defence within the castle walls. This is like a 1600 fucking act or whatever it is, 1500 act. And there's all these things, but they've never been either revoked or we never kind of build. We just build on top of them. Do you know what I mean? And so we never have that conversation. And I feel that's just what's kind of happening with drugs here now is they're going, oh no, we're putting this is the new one law. If you want to have the conversation, we're putting the new law on top of that one. And then if there's another group here, you have a conversation, but instead of just going, well, can we look at all of it and acknowledge that it's all fucked?
Yeah, we have a very salient comparison we can make here, I think, especially from considering my background and my experiences, the Iraq War. That war, it was a war, yet another war based on lies.
Can I ask
another fake war based on lies? It was all over resources and everything else.
Which Iraq war?
There was a million. Yeah, there was 1 million people came out on the streets to stop the war in Iraq. You see, yet another fake war based on lies. And yet, where's the outrage for the war on drugs, which is yet another fake war based on lies? And we know this because the historical record shows it.
It's a war for, like, it's in the same way the war on drugs led to the idea and the conceptualization and the creation of the war on terror. An idea that you can conceptualize an enemy and they are not defined to a nation state. They are not defined by one nationality or identity. They're a war with a concept, people that would choose to use drugs. It's not about the drugs. It's about people that choose to use drugs. They're the danger.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the thing is, because the inclusion of cannabis in the war on drugs is highly divisive, because its versatility as a resource means that instead of us growing all of our energy production at home, we now have to go off to foreign countries to go and get their resources for our energy production. So the inclusion of cannabis in the war on drugs feeds the war on terror with willing acolytes. Yeah, in which case the inclusion of cannabis in the war on drugs makes you fearful of everyone every way.
Exactly that. Yeah, it's the same kind of installed fear that is perpetuated and proliferated by the legacy media, by politicians, by even sort of local politics. You know what I mean? There is always this scapegoating, this demonization of a subgroup throughout human history, and it just so happens that right now, because of the acceptance of other identities and forms of I don't know, collective acceptance of people's expressions of themselves. Drug users seem to be the last group that you can really persecute. You can really stigmatize. Do you know what I mean? You couldn't go after somebody for their nationality, for their sexuality, for their gender identity. Do you know what I mean? We live in a different reality, but it just feels that the war on drugs is the last accepted persecution by the state, mass persecution by the state.
The Nixon administration had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be against the war of black, so we associated heroin and cocaine with the blacks and marijuana with the hippies, and then we could go into communities, we could vilify their leaders night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. John Ehrlichman, 1995.
Yeah, that was Nixon's former advisor on drugs when he instituted
He was the architect of the war on drugs.
The modern war on drugs, yeah. Yeah, exactly that. And so that's what I'm saying is where we live at now is the war on drugs is the tool by which racism, classism, sexism, homophobia is still expressed. Do you know what I mean?
Me and you, we've read that WHO document, WHO EPD 56, which underlines the Schedule 1 status of cannabis worldwide. Something else that was deemed inadmissible. You know, I mean, me and you have read that document, and we know it's highly racist. It's the source of institutionalized racism, if you will. Page 8 talks about, this one always sticks in my head. Page 8 talks about how Mohammedan men engage in cannabis abuse as a way of gaining a state of euphoria because of a lackluster sex life due to the practice of female circumcision. This is literally page 8. It's like, what the hell is this bollocks? Yeah. Well, again, that document is inadmissible in court in defence.
Exactly, in defence, but then it wouldn't be as a piece of evidence in a court case against the government in a judicial review or in some form.
Well, yeah, exactly. This is why for me, as I was saying, they won't accept it in that arena. So, okay, right. I think the next stage has to be to go after the coppers and busters, civil case. Yeah, I don't see the point in going for an appeal because if I go for an appeal, there's every chance that it can shaft us further. So I think the next stage has to be going after the coppers themselves because they're independent legal entities and they have to get it right. It's kind of like the O.J. Simpson approach to justice. You know, in a criminal court, he got let off because the gloves didn't fit. But in a civil case, he had to shell out millions to his ex's family.
Yeah, it's an interesting system. You found sort of you're not guilty of the crime, but you can be found guilty of responsibility for it in a civil case. It's an interesting kind of mechanism, and again, it comes down to something you and I have both been told by people in authoritative positions in this country. It doesn't matter what has happened; it's what you can prove in court. Is the only thing that matters. Is what the judge is going to believe. What is admissible and what is procedural.
Exactly, and we can't admit anything into court in a criminal case in our defence, so we've got to go another route, which only route I see is civil.
There is, just for the record here, folks, there is something that I'm trying to figure out how I'll put this out into the public arena. There is a possibility that you could instruct, if you were to take legal counsel or if you were to act as litigant in person, you can technically bait the CPS. If you can get the Crown Prosecution Service to speak of something which you require in evidence or you have tried to submit but had rejected because it has not been deemed admissible, it would then become admissible. if it is then stated into the record, then you can then reference back to it. If you can get them to speak of an evidence that isn't in record, you can then present the evidence to confirm it on the record. So there are ways that you can sneak things onto the record. There's a few sort of different legal tricks that I'm trying to learn from different people at the minute, as to how it's gaming the system ultimately when you look at it, because frankly, this is a game. It's a pageantry. When you walk into there, it's a set. It's you look between the wall and the facade of it, it's a designed set. You know what I mean? They put on their wigs and there is a procedure and a pageantry to it. It's a performance at the end of the day. And it's about you being stood before those that are your superior, those that are your better. They know better than you. They're more informed. And yeah, it's then you having the ceremony of hung head, hands in palm. I'm sorry. I won't do it again. And that's all it is just a revolving door of fuckery. It is, yeah.
It really is just as ridiculous as what you say, but at the same time, it's as ridiculous as all that pageantry is. It's also horrifying to think that, and just in the time that I've been involved with this, I've seen people lose their families over what I know beyond a reasonable doubt is a criminal conspiracy of fraud and terrorism being committed against us all. We know this. It's been confirmed by various legal types who've looked at every bit of evidence. And yet here we are literally victims of the state.
Yeah. So I was just Googling all this. I wanted to bring something up, but I wanted to make sure that I hadn't dreamt it because it sounds so insane for a second there. The London lawyer in training in the UK is choosing a vegan alternative to the traditional wigs that they have to wear, which are all made from horsehair.
I've seen that.
Chose cannabis fibers. And so he's then soon to be obviously practicing. And then if he's then bringing in a wig where he's literally wearing cannabis on his head, and yet it's still then going to have to be forced by the law to go, you were in possession of cannabis while in possession of cannabis, and send you down. And we're supposed to just look at this and go, that seems rational.
Exactly.
I don't get how we're supposed, what is in part of this. I know obviously we're supposed to respect the uniform and be fearful of the authorities and just be scared and live in our little corners of our lives. But what about the people that actually believe there's truth and there's justice? The people that go into life going, well, drugs are bad and druggies are bad. And then they hear a story of someone that's not a bad person that happened to do drugs. And I mean, it happens, believe it or not. That's unfortunately, statistically, the vast majority of people of all consumers of all substances, according to global drug surveys and the World Health Organization's recent statistics around dependencies. So yeah, these conflicting ideologies and that cognitive dissonance and bias of them being like, well, but the drugs are bad, but they're a good person, but bad, but good. And then those arguments fall into arbitrary definition, as they should. Good and bad is subjective. Do you know what I mean? This is what the law says. There is no good and bad. Did you break the law? Yes. It's not good or bad. You've broken the law. They don't go into moralizing. That system is designed to remove it.
I'm going to disagree with you there, because the law is supposed to be moral. Well,
sorry. Okay, I'll separate the difference. Their version of moral and actual moral. It's not moral by what I would consider people's human standards. It's morals by the arbitrary morality that's been created by institutions. I'll agree with that.
Yeah, that one I'll agree with you. As far as I'm concerned, their morality absolutely in. It angers us when I look at it all, because I spent years pushing myself to get every single government agency I could on my CV. I went to Iraq in 2003, which allowed us to get a security clearance, which took us to working for British Aerospace, the Satellite Defence Network, the police, GCHQ, MPS, CPS, DWP, Home Office, the whole bloody lot at one time or another. I know how hard I had to push myself to do all of that. And to see people just follow orders and have a system that I thought was fair made a complete mockery of. It makes us feel like I've wasted those years pushing myself that hard. It makes you wonder what the hell kind of country do we bloody live in?
Yeah.
We're always taught that we live in a fair country, that where if you commit a crime, you'll get a fair trial and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, it's nothing like that at all. Actually, I think if more people realise the kind of stuff that me and you realise, I think you'd have a lot more people out on the streets.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's quite true that you and I go through waves of apathy and great grief, rage, and anger. It's a difficult spectrum of emotion. Some mornings you wake up and I'm coming around, do the drive and just Another day it's kind of sit, just mope with a cup of tea, like, we'll get through today. It's fine. Because again, I think you and I, we share a kinship in that you and I can both see a much larger picture that just to a lot of people makes us seem quite lunatics, for lack of a better way of wording it. And again, it can be an intimidating idea. And I'm not saying that you or I particularly are that knowledgeable or intellectual or have a grand IQ and we're any great whatever. It's just that we've both spent consistently several years really looking at this from an objective position, changing our opinions, advancing our knowledge base, and arriving at the same conclusion that it is entirely the corruption of a small group of individuals at all levels that keeps this grand lie going. That is, as you said, that if the media, the legacy media was worth its weight, they would be grabbing these narratives and exploring. They would be truly looking at what is happening and understanding that actually the demonization of the heroin consumer on the average city street corner is intrinsically linked to our international policies abroad. It's intrinsically linked to our energy production policies, to our socioeconomic policies within various regions. Everything is so intrinsically linked. And you and I see the linchpin of this is the ultimate renewable resource in cannabis.
Yeah, I was just a couple of days before going in for my trial. There was I think it's there's one of the green organisations. I can't remember which one it is now. Apparently, they're suing the government over the lack of ideas for net zero. Yeah, I'm thinking to myself, I delivered one to you 5 years ago, and it wasn't like it was a new idea. It was Henry Ford from 100 years ago. If we listened to Henry Ford 100 years ago, we wouldn't be in the shit now. But instead, we listened to Harry Anslinger in 1937, who talked about how just one marijuana would make white women want to sleep with black and Latino jazz musicians. And that scared the shit out of middle America and led to prohibition.
Yeah, and then on the other side of the Atlantic, a certain Rudolph Diesel falls into the North Sea while trying to get to England for the Diesel Unification Conference, and all of a sudden petroleum is the main base crude that it's going to be used for combustion engines and not vegetable oils, which is what they were looking at with sunflower and cannabis. So yeah,
exactly.
It's interesting how history plays out like that. It's almost like there's some grand acts occurring behind the scenes. But I digress.
There's some criminal conspiracy theories again.
Yeah. And again, I'm not suggesting that there's like 5 people sat in a room that rule fucking everything. There are people, a small cabal of individuals in everything that do seek to do so. Whether they actually are able to implement all of their machinations or not is a different situation.
Yes, not 5.
I know their names.
Actually, yeah. There's what's her name? Abby Martin. She does a podcast called The Empire Files. She used to be on RT doing a program on there called Breaking the Set, which is where I discovered her. And on an episode of The Empire Files, she talks about a book that was released, I think it was a couple of years ago, about how 8 corporations basically rule everything across the world. They own all the various other corporations.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, if you look at Food, fashion, fuels, and even then, it's the illusion of competition, because you got to remember here, folks, that the way that investment has been diversified since Reaganomics in the 80s has meant that it's all about venture capital investment and ownership of the investment in the shares. So it doesn't matter who has actually sat at the head of that company. They don't necessarily know shit. They're often just, again, another puppet, in the same way the political leaders are in all of the countries around the world. And it's the people that then run those investment vessels, interesting language that they use, that then control the high seas of finance, shall we say. So yeah.
Something else that I pointed out to my solicitor, the solicitor who took over, and she almost thought I was one of these freemen on the land type. She turned around and she said something about how this is the law of the land, and I had to correct that. And I was like, no, this is maritime law. Maritime law that was established by a navy that we would never have had but for cannabis. Yeah.
Again, to her ear, though, you may as well have said that I like peaches because they're green.
Exactly.
That's literally what she heard and went, okay. Because again, that's what I was saying before about the big, the bigger picture thing.
Yeah, that's the kind of vibe I was getting. Yeah, it's like by the end of it, she sat like, oh, thank God for cannabis, whilst laughing. I was like, you really don't get it, though, do you?
Well, it's using a kind of regressivism through thinking to arrive at the origin of an issue. So you and I kind of both did say, why are drugs illegal? Okay, let's look at the economics of this. Let's look at things like the DuPont family and what was going on with, what the hell was the paper merchant in North America, the Yellow Press?
Oh,
name escapes me right now. Randolph Hearst, thank you. And individuals like that. So, and then even further back from that,
Randolph Hearst was another one who financed all of the prohibition as well, because of
he was a promulgator.
Cannabis was affecting his investments into timber, which for his yellow journalism. So his yellow journalism led the prohibition of cannabis, which sent his timber stocks way up.
There's also the connections. I mean, there's a few copper barons to be chucked in there, and a few of the physical resources, people that were at the top of their game at the time that obviously set to gain. I mean, the yellow top press are analogous to the red top press that we have now in the UK, and the links between the Murdoch family and the UK Parliament, until obviously quite recently, but still it continues to some degree, just quite more covert than overt, was the same that was going on then. So they were basically the mouthpiece for politics at the time, and politicians were being gaslit by fucking Harry Anslinger and others of going like, what is it? The US Surgeon General once testified in court in evidence of the effects of marijuana that he consumed a marijuana one night and it actually turned him into a bat. He didn't mean it. He was asked to clarify if he meant, oh, do you mean you felt like? And he said, no, it turned me into a bat. That was part of the justification of the evidence bundle that informed the consensus for the law in America. It's an insanity. And as you said, with the accusations of jazz musicians using it to, create sexual promiscuity amongst white housewives, was again just playing to the fears of the middle class, who were still dealing with coming to the ends of sort of certain parts of segregation. There's still obviously quite a lot of institutional issues at the time, but then this idea of them seeing this what they considered forced integration, or what most people consider just progressive.
Yeah, and the Great, they were just coming out of the Great Depression as well, so people actually had a bit of money in their pocket and they were starting to get lives and all the rest of it. So they had to have some money to be fired off.
Exactly that, and this is then what we saw with the Cold War, with then the Korean War. We've just gone through American history here, but obviously with the Korean War, and then leading through just the stagnation of the Cold War, which was again an intentional thing to have a boogeyman. Countries understood at the end of the Second World War that it was very necessary to have a boogeyman.
But if you remember, when the Americans decided to join the Second World War in 1942, all of a sudden hemp was the savior. We had the Hemp for Victory campaign, didn't we?
We did. part of that is because America spent the most part of the war selling its resources to both fucking sides. So then when it came for them to get in the war, they needed someone to fucking use in the war.
Yeah, but everybody thinks that all of that Hemp for Victory campaign was all about the favours for like ropes and uniforms and stuff like that. But what many people don't realise, it was actually all about the root balls for gunpowder.
But it would smell lovely on the battlefield.
No, I think the highest of high explosives.
I was going to say, that is definitely anything you need to keep the THC in when you're using a cannabis, explosives. So at least if I'm going to be blown up by something, I want a good terpene profile. Oh man, that's some morbid shit. But yeah, it shows how fast an authoritative institution and a populace and the general zeitgeist of a culture can change towards its opinion of one thing. So we saw this very quickly since basically the mid-90s. I mean, it started technically in, I can't remember which Midwestern American state. They created effectively the first compassionate care access program, but it was very limited and very kind of abusable. But then obviously California, 96, kickstarted this whole thing of the idea of, we term it now, prescription cannabis, or the medical use of cannabis, or in America, medical marijuana. And then since that, the shift in people's ideology, the vast majority of people now are for medical cannabis because they think medical cannabis, as it were, or prescription cannabis, whatever wording they hear, they think of epileptic children, they think of a sick and dying person, or an elderly person getting use of their hands again from using a balm, or they've really workshopped a narrative into it.
As you say, we talked about this years ago. It's this whole harm reduction narrative rather than, look, this stuff's absolutely really bloody good for you. Just crack on with it. But we know all of that was all written into international treaties back in the 1950s. That IHO's Act document details it all.
It kind of started in if you look at it, I suppose the first major intervention is around 1922 with the opium conventions. And so that's when the global collective power elites got together and were kind of like, drugs is a thing. How much are drugs worth? If we restrict drugs, we can control drugs. And again, probably I'm going to put some allegedly in there and a bit of, this is probably a hot take and maybe quite conspiratorial thinking. But if you actually look, it feels like once we got conglomeratization of international power, either Britain went, oh, drugs are a hell of a business to get into, or the rest of them went, you sell drugs, let us sell some drugs. Because since then, global powers have been intrinsically involved. I mean, it's speculative as a conservative estimate to be worth $350 billion a year of the illicit drug trade, and that's still little figures, I would say, compared to its actual impact.
Yeah, well, just look at Afghanistan. I mean, in Afghanistan, the Americans they couldn't have farmers farming stuff like wheat and barley or whatever, because that would impact on American farmers' interests, which is why they had to grow poppies for heroin. When Afghanistan accounts for 95%, sorry, is it 95% of the world's supply of heroin?
I think it's up there, yeah.
Yeah, and America accounts for 85% of world demand.
Yeah.
And the other thing that Afghans got is quite a few mineral deposits, especially stuff like lithium, which again, going into those American electric cars. What's got your attention there? Like,
I'm trying to decipher these really crappily put together graphics. Right, so it's the current adjusted figures for opium production in tons between 1990 and 2019, so over a 30 year period. Afghanistan was responsible across these figures, adjusted figures, for over 80% of global opium production. Certain years it drops like significantly, big drop. Taliban Taliban ban before the US invasion in 2000, like the graph's going like this and it just drops for 1 year block. And then as soon as the US invasion is done, production is ramped right the fuck back up.
Yeah, but that's it. That was part of the theory, one of the conspiracy theories of 9/11. Was that the American banks were losing $300 million a month due to the Taliban doing way too good a job of cracking down on the opiates industry.
Wow. So the other thing to look at the comparisons of these statistics, anyone that remembers sort of the British invasion of the American and British, I suppose, backed invasion of Afghanistan in the turn of the 21st century will remember Helmand as being a very contentious area. Over 115,000 hectares were used for poppy production. In 2020, and the rest of the other regions, for example, like Kabul, is only 284 hectares. So it should that's where the Americans were most prevalent. Isn't that where they had? I can't remember what the name of that base was. There was a famous base down there.
Yeah, that's right, Helmand. They had I can't remember the name of the base, but they had a real rough time there because going through Helmand, they wanted to put a pipeline that goes from Saudi to Israel. And there was a lot of our lads lost their lives and limbs in Helmand, all over a bloody pipeline.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you look at then Russia's, I can't remember the name of the.
One thing I will say, if there's anybody watching this who's grown their own, there's a company called the Real Seed Company, who deal with a lot of Afghan farmers and the rest of it. Some of their stock is absolutely outstanding, very reasonably priced, well worth a look into.
I'm trying to find a certain image that I saw last year.
What's that?
The projected exportation networks from Russia and Saudi Arabia. The pipelines they wanted to run through Eastern Europe and through the Middle East into Europe. The projections of these, basically, it's an image that when it's laid down over a map, it maps out current conflicts. Again, if you want to look at, say, for a better idea of how foreign powers use destabilize regions and create warfare and insurgency to then create a need for invasion and stabilization, just go look at like Venezuela in South America. Look at the CIA backed, like actual, these are recorded non-conspiracy theories, like actual factually recorded events of the CIA coups in South America. All over resource control, which again brings back to that thing of how frustrating I guess it is for you or I when we can see cannabis get end petroleum, the need for global petroleum production.
Exactly. So the inclusion of cannabis in the war on drugs feeds a war on terror with willing acolytes from all over the world, thanks to the likes of BP and Shell and all the rest of it.
Yeah. So I'm just looking at it.
Well, that's obviously why they don't want those industries to stabilise, because then that destabilises the military-industrial complex as well. So if the likes of British Aerospace and Raytheon don't have anybody to sell products to, what happens to them? Yeah, they're too big to go under after all.
Well, yeah, this is it. I mean, unless the military-industrial complex suddenly starts diversifying its portfolio and its production of products, then yeah, well, I mean, this is what we're seeing with the over-militarization of not just the American streets, but predominantly the American streets, but also here in the UK and in other Western democracies. You know, Bojo, obviously, there's the famous thing with the water cannons, but that's, I guess, in a lot of ways a misnomer and a distraction from the fact that look at the average response units that are in most towns and cities now. Most places have an armed response unit, terrorism units, you know, they have rapid response units. And they're preparing for threats that a lot of them, frankly, I would speculate, either manufactured or allowed to occur. We've seen this in the FBI in trapping many people around the world and finding out about plots, inserting operatives to ensure that they get to commit it, but not actually do it, so they can lock them up forever. And then, you know, it's all just, yeah.
Yeah, I remember working for when I was working for the police down in Warwickshire. Probably the only time I ever felt scared was talking to a guy from ERU, because he was just thick as two short blanks. Like, how the hell do you end up with a job where you're handling a gun?
Because he'll follow every instruction instantaneously. It literally move left.
All kinds of alarm bells ringing him. Like,
it's scary because this arms race, as Neil Woods discussed it, of the war on drugs has created, is taking it from being your hippie guy who would quite happily, wear your baggy trousers and be emblazoned in the emblems of his culture and not be too worried about things because there wasn't really an issue. Then the war on drugs occurred. And it's like an evolutionary mechanism in terms of survival of the fittest. And then so the creatures that learn to adapt to their environment survive. And the people that adapted best to the war on drugs were criminals. Not the criminalized, not us lot that are just decent folk that just like to interact with drugs and either couldn't grow our own or buy and trade and interact with people that we identify as being moralistic and decent people, but also other criminalized individuals. Most people don't want to be around criminals. A criminal is someone that will steal from anyone. A criminal is someone that would hurt anyone. A criminal is someone who's just someone that is not.
A criminal is also somebody who just follows orders.
Exactly that. It's somebody that it doesn't have the ability to run through their individualized moral filter, their individual actions. So everything is just, no, I don't need to look at that. I don't need to self-reflect. I don't need to, be critical or analytical of my own actions. And the people like that I feel are often found and then put into situations like the army or policing services or other institutional roles that are basically, as you say, literally just follow orders. They are proud and quite happy knowing that they're in their belief that them following orders is for the greater good. They are, in my opinion, indoctrinated or in belief of this good, bad paradigm. I am a good person doing a good role. And then therefore anyone that I've been told is bad is bad. I don't need to question if they're good or bad. They're a bad person. I wouldn't be here if they weren't bad. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
You can see that self-fulfilling prophecy that I imagine goes on in the heads of most coppers. You know what I mean? They can't
not just most coppers, most people, mate. This is why, like, say, I wouldn't have one of the reasons I looked at working for the government. It was like, if I'm doing all of this good work, I'm getting paid all of this good wages and all the rest of it, I must be a good person.
Yeah, you're being rewarded. It's literally Pavlovian conditioning. You're being rewarded for a behavior, so you repeat the behavior. You're then being punished for a behavior, and you're supposed to. This is why they're so frustrated with you, Trev. They're punishing you. They're threatening you. Why didn't you back down sooner? Do you know what I mean? And that's the offense. They couldn't almost care less about what you've actually done. It's that you've had the fortitude, the hubris to stand against me. Yeah, to actually go, I'm sorry, I believe you're wrong. Here's a load of reasons why I think you're wrong. And they're prepared for this. They're in that circumstance, they think, well, we don't admit this. I don't accept this. You've said this. Therefore, you're done. Say you're wrong or we're going to fuck you.
Yeah.
That's not justice. That's like fucking a mafia kind of fucking thing. You know what I mean? It's really almost passive aggressive, and there's no discussion of right or wrong. There's no why were you doing this? What was your aim for it? It is literally as arbitrary as, did you do the thing? Yes. Here's the punishment. Yeah, in mitigation, you can obviously discuss why you did it and present evidence as, not necessarily evidence, but you can present reasons as to why you should have a lessened or reduced sentence. But yeah, once you're guilty, you then fall foul of the mandatory minimum, which in your case, I think you fell to. But it's just ridiculous that the threat of that is, we're either basically going to give you enough to say, well, go away, or we're going to fucking really ruin your life and waste close to fucking £500,000 to put you in a cage. Can you imagine what you could do over fucking 6 years if they give you £500,000?
Oh God!
If they were willing to piss that money,
I wouldn't be sat here. I know that much.
But that's how absurd this really is, though. It's the same with homelessness. If you then look at the criminalization of it, if you then look at everything that they do to police this, to govern it, to force people into institutions and go, all right, the dog, your only companion in the world, yeah, you're not allowed that. Drugs, the only thing they've ever comforted you, yeah, we're going to test you, so you can't have them. And then you wonder why then people are going to choose to live on the street. They're going to choose the life of autonomy, of self-regulation and governance and control over a prison sentence because of their trauma, because of they're struggling with their mental health, their physical health, their current station and situation in life. That is immoral. That is fucked up. But that's the situation we live in, is that an overarching authority in the government says, well, this is the law. And most people go, well, oh, it is the law though. And that sentence alone is so painful to me, because it just doesn't, what happens when they fall foul of the law? And they go, well, yeah, but the law is law, and they'll have their excuses, they'll have their reasons, they'll have their outrage, their frustrations. But if we all suddenly came to the realization today, we could maybe do something about that. Do you know, if enough people were truly outraged by any one number of these things, something would get fucking done.
This is what I keep saying. It's a criminal conspiracy of fraud and terrorism. And until people actually start to realise that, they're just going to think, no, the law's the law.
Why do you think do you think it's ignorance, or do you think it's fear? Is it the idea of, imagine then you're already in a prison, you know you're in a prison, you're watching the guys down the line getting beaten for doing a thing. Your inclination is to then probably not to do that thing to avoid getting beaten. And so it's the psychology of the hell did they call it, the synopticon or whatever it was, the 360 prison design of the.
I'm going to tell you right now, I genuinely believe it is ignorance. And the reason I know it's ignorance is because the two lads that were dropping us off on the way back, I turned around at one point and I asked them, how would you feel if you discover that everything that you're doing is based on literally nothing at all? And they turned around and said, obviously, well, we wouldn't be too happy, obviously. But that's the position that you're in.
They can't even justify it. But if you'd have been asked, then why do you think cannabis is legal? They'd have then said, oh, it causes psychosis. You could have then rebutted that. They could have then said, oh, look at this. You could have rebutted that.
There was one guy came into the cell at one point and they turned around and, oh, it's in this schedule and because of its harm to society. And I just, at that point, I was like, no, get out. Every word out your mouth is going to be false by representation. You've got a pal there who's going to be a witness to just how badly you're going to get this wrong. And I was like, oh, just leave me alone, please. They're really not doing any due diligence whatsoever. It really genuinely is ignorance. But it's choosing to be ignorant. Because,
willful.
Like I say, I mean, my experience, I follow. The only reason I know that there's nothing to back up the charges, and the reason I've shouted about this for years, is because I followed their procedures. And their procedures say you've got to have full justification before you can, fully evidence justification before you can move to arrest. And the only thing that gives them justification is that Schedule 1 or Schedule 2, whatever it is at the minute. And without any evidence to back that up, they cannot move to arrest.
But the issue is that, as they've said, it's self-evident. It is a crime to possess cannabis without the strict limited circumstances by which you can do it lawfully.
Schedule 1 cannabis. I completely agree with that. Schedule 1 harmful stuff.
Agree. But
if it's really as badly as harmful as that, yeah, keep it banned.
Yeah, but
it didn't mean any of that. Like,
the issue is that the qualifying criteria is used to create categorization. Once something is categorized, it is defined, and this is what they've argued, that cannabis that isn't lawful is any other cannabis that isn't lawful is Schedule 1 cannabis as far as they're concerned. This is how they've tricked the game, is they've just locked it out by then going, all right, we've created arbitrary ruling under the Misuse of Drugs Regulation 2001 Schedule 2 for a cannabis-based medicinal product designed for human consumption, medicine designed for human consumption. Mm-hmm. And then they've created this arbitrary classification of a handful of cultivars of low THC and called them hemp. They're your lawful ways to possess cannabis. Anything else that falls outside of that remit is caught into that law. They can't say it, and this is why your defense was a good way of challenging it, because it allowed us to see how the system responds to it, and their response to it is, we don't accept your argument.
Exactly.
That's the frustrating thing of it, is in a philosophical debate, if you were in a chambers of one of the hallowed university fucking debate societies across this fucking country, you would have validity in your claim because it's evidenced, it's rational, it's moralistic, it's tangible and real. But because the court system is based upon that which is admissible, therefore accepted, they do not accept it. And we know this is all part of the greater narrative in that before they then changed the law in 2018 in November to create prescription cannabis, the lawful prescribing of cannabis in certain circumstances, they said that that cannabis had no accepted therapeutic value. Accepted therapeutic value. It's not that it didn't have any. Again, it's the language. They're very smart with this language. So it does have the cannabis that isn't a Schedule 1 substance because it doesn't meet the criteria, has intrinsic therapeutic value. So therefore, they can't schedule it under their own definitions to meet the criteria, which is what your argument was based on, which I said would have merit in a judicial review environment or in a just basic rational debate. But in their arena that they have carefully constructed and crafted, we are denied justice.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So we are paying for this, and all of our council tax is about to go up 5% to pay for this bollocks. Which includes the police, who are paying taxes for that black market industry as well.
So I think it's the case we need to broaden our research into looking at, I guess, the economic costs of this. If we can have a calculation of how much it's just cost them to put you in this position versus then the impact it's had on you versus then the potential that your knowledge and your experience could have garnered you in a lawful end of cannabis prohibition market.
As a point, I think this is one of the reasons that the barrister turned around and said, why don't you go and do this somewhere else, was that I pointed out that in this country, I'm worth universal credit. In another country like America, because of what I've learned over the last 10 years, I could be, just as a basic grower, I could be making 100 grand a year. But because of my background before that, with all my management experience and all the rest of it, I could be something maybe to $250,000 a year as a master grower.
It's a frustrating state of affairs. I mean, I feel very similar. I was referred to in a consultation the other day as a subject material expert as well, and it got me thinking, like, oh, what's the term? Googled it, and I looked at kind of the salaries of people in various industries, and was like, what the fuck? And it's just so detached from, I guess, what our realities are.
Yeah,
it's like they're talking about working for a fucking month to pay for a year of what I live on now, if not more. Like working for a week. I mean, the juxtaposition between the integrity of the individuals I basically see it almost as it would be a crime if I set up a cannabis business now. It wouldn't be a lawful crime, but it would be a moralistic one against my own principles. I don't want to profiteer from the perpetuation of prohibition. And unfortunately, there are some amazing brands and products and services and whatever else out there right now. But the fact that not every single person is adding towards a pot and a campaign to truly end the war and free everybody and start to have the rational conversation about the harm that's been caused over the past 50 years, it's disingenuous and it kind of falls towards profiteering. And I know there's some people that are going to be offended maybe by that contention, but it is controversial. I get that, but for me personally, that's all I'm saying. It's the same reason I struggle with the notion of the prescription system, is that I don't want to involve somebody else in my healthcare or in my life. Do you know what I mean? I know what cannabis does for me. I don't want to have to involve another agency or entity.
Yeah, that one I would agree with. I'm very much like that myself. I'm getting involved with other agencies over the last year because I didn't ever have me the weed to use. I've ended up getting addicted to codeine and pregabalin. I generally wake up like 5 o'clock every morning, lean, scratching on, itching on, like, I've got to have a fix. Get up and get them, and then I'm married. I can get another couple of hours kip.
I mean, like gabapentin and what's its sister drug that's often prescribed with it? I can't remember.
Pregabalin.
Pregabalin, yeah, thank you. Yeah, they've both been scheduled without prescription as a Class C drug.
Right.
So they've actually created criminalization for possession and trade, because there is now an illicit market in the UK for, there has been for a little while. We kind of picked it up at the same time America did, but obviously nowhere near as much, because we were kind of insulated by not really having too much access to things like Oxycontin. But yeah, as you said, that again, this detachment from the point of government, which is to protect its citizens, that it will allow the proliferation and the creation of a pharmaceutical industrial complex that perpetuates a sickness industry and criminalizes conversations around wellness.
For me, the group of drugs that's going to cause real havoc when supply to wane or whatever would be benzodiazepines. Those things are absolutely evil from what I can see. I know a couple of lads who are heavily addicted to them. One of them ended up having a nervous breakdown when he tried to quit them, and another one ended up in hospital. The pair of them they're going to be addicts for the rest of their lives. They're not getting off them. And if they do get off them, they've still got it, because of the way benzos work on the brain, they're still going to have addiction till death, or withdrawal till death, sorry. And they can go through that whole post-acute withdrawal symptoms as well, which can be pretty horrendous from all accounts.
Yeah, I mean, there seems to be reset of neurology. So there's, again, contentious kind of conversation, I guess, in that there's an argument to be made both sides that all dependency is treatable because it's just about resetting neurology and behavioral patterns. So through enough therapy and through, I mean, we're starting to obviously understand where the stuff like ibogaine works and ayahuasca, et cetera, and what that's able to do in terms of either resetting the neurology on one side, or in the latter's case, creating a new experience of reality that creates such an ingrained neurological pathway that it's the same as having a religious experience in people with the AA, for example, that they have such a profound experience that they draw will from that whenever they would otherwise think that, oh, normally I would do this. And it's either from, there is obviously dependent components towards chemical abuse, but the majority of it is human. You know what I mean? In fact, drugs are neutral in that sense, but it's the way in which we sort of interact with them. But again, the benzo conversations, we've not really had that in the UK yet. All we did was, 20 years ago, quietly try to start ramping down prescriptions. But all that did is, again, create a massive illicit market. And now we're flooded with fake diazepam from India. And those are cut with all sorts of shit. And the issue is their powder mixes, when they're pressing them, some of these 10 milligrams that they're selling are closer to a fucking 100. And some of them are closer to 0.10, you know, whatever. It's the discrepancy in them. It's quite ridiculous. And again, it's not having that conversation, to go back to Gabe Beaumarte's quote that I often do in this podcast, of don't ask why the addiction, ask, you know, why the trauma, why the pain. Why does this individual need to keep going back to this substance? It's doing something. Obviously, there is the argument of escapism. So then it's, even if it's not individual pain, it's socioeconomic issues. It's living in the environment you do, this hopelessness that the vast majority of us feel, especially now coming out of this collective global pandemic, that we're now moving into what the potential for, as they're saying, is being billed as World War III and economic collapse and the Great Reset and all these grand narratives that are just terrifying to the vast majority of the populations of all nation states.
It does make me. I'm 50-year-old now, so I know I've only got maybe 25 years left at best. So it makes me worry about the kind of world that the likes of you are growing into.
I like that. I'm still growing.
Yeah, you're only 30-year-old. You've still got a long way to go. Yeah, mate, take me word for it. I mean, if you can still be the same person in 10 years' time, then you feel evolution, like.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I sit here 34 this year, and I've probably been through half a dozen to a dozen iterations of myself, because I keep having, thankfully, often down to entheogenic substances and sort of revelatory experiences, this transition, I guess, from different chapters of my life, a recognition that certain behaviors and likes and wants and whatever don't represent who I am today. They may be what I wanted a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but I think that's why it's so important to have that continual check-in with yourself. You know what I mean? I often do it around my birthday, especially, and kind of have that self-reflection of, right, I'm another year older. Where am I? Where did I want to be? What do I want to do? What don't I want to do? And you kind of building that intention.
And then you go and take a massive trip.
Yeah, typically. Yeah. But I think you're saying about drugs that kind of worry you with their reduction. I think the other one as well for me is SSRIs. I think this is why so heavily there is this creation of or movement from the pharmaceutical industrial complex into investment into psilocybin or psilocin analog drugs in therapy. And yeah, again, that feels that they know that the SSI model is very limited in terms of the efficacy of it. Don't quote me on this, but I think I remember reading a meta study that suggested somewhere in the region of 30 to 40% efficacy in comparison to something like cannabis, which if you saw a recent, I think it was a blog post by a psychiatrist in the UK who proclaimed prescription cannabis as the best tool that he's seen in psychiatry in 20 years. Saying that in one plant, he has the ability to treat autism, ADHD, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder.
Yeah, actually, speaking of that, that was something that Mike Barnes mentioned to us. He did a report for us for the courts that said I would qualify for a prescription, but obviously being on universal credit, there's absolutely no way I could afford one. He turned around and said, "Hey, if you suffer from anxiety, there's really good evidence for that one. So make sure you get that. Make sure you put that one down." So obviously, I did.
It's interesting because we had. I say we, the grand old we here at Simpa Life, me, myself, and I had Mike on not too long ago, and I asked him the same question I asked him a year ago when I had him on. Does prescription cannabis as an industry worry about psychosis? To which he said, no, not at all. And so then if they're saying that it's one of the best body of evidence they have for the efficacy of cannabis for treatment of conditions is anxiety, and yet they're saying that smoking cannabis illegally makes you anxious, perhaps it's not the cannabis. Perhaps it's being a criminal. Perhaps it's worrying that every siren you hear and every blue light you see.
No, mate, you've got it wrong.
That's a strong word. I've got it wrong.
Yeah, mate, you're missing the beat. Now, and this is something that again got brought up at the trial. My barrister was talking about how they've seen a threefold increase in cannabis psychosis over the last so many years. And I turned around and said, no, you haven't. What you've seen is an increase in tobacco psychosis. Because the tobacco has now been linked as a causal factor in psychosis schizophrenia. This is now, again, bringing up Mike Barnes. Me and you had this conversation with him at one of the very first events at Hemp Gardens.
2017.
Where, going back a few years now, yeah. I asked him then, if you look at the very, very basics of what psychosis is, it's a loss of neurons in the hippocampus and amygdala regions of the brain. However, when you ingest cannabis, it starts a process called neurogenesis, which is the creation of new pathways and neurons in the hippocampus and amygdala areas of the brain. So if cannabis sparks neurogenesis, how can it cause psychosis? And as Mike himself said, we don't know. Now, as he said, a few years later, he's now, as you've just said, and the prescription cannabis industry isn't worried about psychosis. Why is that? Because there's no bloody tobacco involved.
Yeah, exactly. So, but the other side of it is there is I would argue, a palatable argument to be made of the structural consequences of criminalization in terms of.
Oh, definitely. I'll make no argument beyond that one because, I mean, I can tell you right now, I would never ever work for the government again. And as far as I'm concerned, the police are not on our side in any way, shape or form. You know, I will never ever participate in this system in any way, shape, or form again, as far as I'm concerned, because it's disgusting. And the fact that we all comply with it is, I'm finding completely mental. And to think that they want us to pay an extra 5% on our council taxes, do one.
Yeah, it's mental. I mean, I won't contest. In fact, it's obviously the same argument that I've put forward with the tobacco link. It's around, I mean, the old statistic that I saw was probably from about 2010 now. It's about 77% of Europeans mix their cannabis with tobacco. Obviously, this becomes it's becoming less prevalent in the youth. I mean, although you have cultural issues of things like, I'm not going to name any brands, but obviously tobacco leaf blunts. It's quite a cultural thing to consume, and people forget that there's nicotine within those products. Obviously, European regulations mean they have to be labeled as such, so that does kind of help. But yeah, we can see that then if you remove criminalization and then you remove tobacco, what we're actually seeing is, again, I've mentioned this before, and it's almost counterintuitive, but the best growing data for the consistent efficacy of cannabis is collectively, globally, in psychiatry. Because again, they've suddenly just flipped the script. Some of them are still advocating, and obviously I would say paid stoolies from the pharmaceutical industrial complex, but there are others that are then suddenly going, wait, I've got 20 years of folders here where I've said these people have got cannabis use disorder or cannabis-induced psychosis, and then all of a sudden they're going, wait, what if they were self-medicating with a medication and looking at it in a different light, and all of a sudden going, oh shit, and seeing then that, all right, maybe me prescribing them an antipsychotic and an SSRI wasn't necessary. I mean, another component to add to this is adulterants. For all it is still quite rare, we are still seeing spice infiltrating into cannabis marketplaces, especially into the vape industry, where you can't see the difference, and it's into novice consumers who are not understanding what cannabis should look like, smell like, act like, feel like, etc.
Do you know who created spice?
Well, this is, again, it's I don't want to say a conspiracy, but because it's true, they were part of it. There were other syntheses of cannabinoid compounds in the early part of the 20th century. But yeah, Pfizer created what became the first popular one, which eventually became a street use drug. Yep.
That's right. The company that gives us fake erections also gives us fake weed.
Yeah, I mean, there's another fake that you can add into that as well. But again, for the world that currently live under, I'm not going to talk about that. But that's probably a hyperbole statement. I don't mean that. I don't know. That was a joke, folks. I'm going to put that on record. I don't fucking know. I don't partake in that. People are quite happy to know my feelings on this. I am needle phobic. I do not engage with needles, and I am grateful for the fact that I had such a traumatic experience at the dentist as a kid, because it's kept me away from intravenous drug use. I have been tempted, believe me, but it's never like at the heights of my depression and of my destructive tendencies as my late teens and in my early 20s. But it was that's kind of protected me. But yeah, that's the only reason I make that joke. I have no fucking idea what's going on with this C word narrative right now. It is what it is, and I'm leaving it to it. I'm focusing on what I can see.
I'm making sure I've got plenty of cannabinoids in my system as preventative measures.
Well, this is interesting because obviously, there's been a couple of studies that have, the main study actually that came out, interestingly, they omitted the major cannabinoid that was used in the study. So a cannabinoid study came out that they used in vitro, so they used cannabinoids on the virus cells, the one that's just recently gone, the word I'm not saying here, folks. And they discovered the CBG, CBD, but also THC in this acidic form binds to spike proteins and stops them, the molecules of that particular virus from entering the human body. But yeah, they omitted THC from it. It wasn't until I actually delved into it, but all of the major outlets across the world that then spoke of this, they put CBG and CBD. They put two major compounds when the study credits THCA, CBDA, CBGA.
Yes, because we can't have too much THC. Simple as that.
Why?
The more THC those plants are producing, the better productive they'll be.
This is it, because THC, you've got to remember the cannabinoid, for all we love cannabis and cannabinoids, it wasn't necessarily designed for us. THC, in terms of its evolution process, from looking at its altitude where it grew up in Tibetan plateau, it's UV protectant. That's its predominant. The fact that we've then interacted with it for millennia, and then we somehow happen to also share similar receptors. It's I don't know. You can argue whether there's an intelligent design there or whether it's evolutionary.
There's got to be some manner of evolution into it, because we were using this plant as food for millennia as well. Yeah, there's a very famous quote that everybody knows in the country connected to it. You know, everybody's seen Oliver Twist. Like, please, sir, can I have some more? Gruel was a byproduct of hemp seed production. Mm-hmm. You know, so I mean, there's even studies now that reckon manna, which was mentioned in Exodus in the Bible. Manna is now being connected with cannabis.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't surprise us. Obviously, there is the narrative, or I say narrative because it's hard to prove these things. I mean, I was going to say about Jesus, so it's the fact that Jesus is mentioned in the sentence. Obviously, the anointing oils of Jesus that are mentioned in the Bible, working with the cannabosum is cannabis. But again, I'm not putting any sort of merit into there maybe was a guy called Jesus. I'm not diminishing Christianity here, but it's, whatever you sort of think of that, the historical accounts that were then recorded of those events would state that, that cannabis was in common use at the time. I mean, there's an argument, I've made it on this podcast a few times. I would very much like Graham Hancock as a guest in the future to just present it with. We know that the mechanisms through the creation of things like concrete that will eventually petrify over time. What are the geological means for being able to tell the difference between petrified plant materials and other mineral formations in a rock? So in other words, did some of these great monoliths and these constructs that were created, were they carved? Because this is the argument that's made, is they didn't have the math, they didn't have the toolage, or were they shaped?
Interesting concept.
So some of the plays on mind.
Actually, there is a site you can have a look at. The Ellora Caves in India is 1,500-year-old hempcrete. It's all been preserved by having hemp in it. Ellora.
Right. Okay.
Is this a new one I'm springing on you again, is it?
Yeah, do love it when I have these conversations with you. Yeah, it's saying that cannabis preserved ancient Indian artwork in the sacred Ellora Caves for 1,500 years. It was a form, they used plaster in the internal spaces, and it regulated the humidity and it deterred insects over the period of time to protect the artworks inside.
Incredible shit, isn't it?
So wow, actually the preservation of that, the image. Yeah. Okay, I'll include a link to this as well in the description below, folks, so you can check out this. But this is something that I definitely want to look at. Because again, if you think of it, if we look at the traditional building constructs of the first world nations, of people that are still quite connected to how would you describe it? I don't want to say ancient times, but sort of prehistory, as it were, for the hominid evolution of humanity, the mud huts and things like that, of the construct of a hard material with something else that dries over time. The notion of us having the intelligence to use this, and then if we were interacting it with many other things anyway, humans used to be incredibly they'd use everything, you know what I mean? We'd incorporate the use of it. Nothing would ever be a waste. We've got loads of this, find a use for it. Do you know what I mean? So I think that kind of intelligence and mechanism, I think that would make more sense. And then the fact that they are constructs that become I don't know whether it become indistinguishable from rock or other mineral formations over time. I don't know the science on that. It's just something that's in my head that I'd quite like to discuss with someone that maybe knows the answers, you know?
Yeah, especially somebody like Graham Hancock.
Oh yeah, I'd just like to pick his brain anyway. That man is a genius. I think he's decades ahead of his time. Once we can get hopefully to like a point where it's not like like historical ideology or religious sort of fundamentalism that informs history, that we can actually collectively get together and go, right, what do you know from 10 years, 1,000 years ago? You lot, and everybody just puts it all in the pile, and we look at it and go, oh, well, that doesn't make sense anymore. That doesn't make sense. Oh, you all saw that as well. That must have been a thing. All right, write that down. Do you know what I mean? Because collectively we have the accounts of human history, but it's been so butchered and bastardized by various rises and falls of empires and kings and fucking...
The Bible is a perfect allegory for that. I mean, it's a badly translated version of the Sumerian Chronicles, which is something like 7,000 years older than the Bible.
I think that there's an argument to be made that most of the major religions are attempts to convey science, attempts to convey experience. So like
definitely experience. I mean, just look at the story of Noah, and you compare that to the work of Graham Hancock. You know, the story of Noah is told in the Sumerian Chronicles as the story of Gilgamesh, which is the story of the Great Flood, which is the survivors of the Younger Dryas impacts.
Yeah, which is where then some of the other theorists on this like to come in with sort of Atlantis and other such sort of concepts. I mean, there is so much within, again, the difference between something in our history that is a conspiracy or a fantasy and something that happened is consensus.
Yeah,
and that's literally, it's whether you get enough people to agree. Could that have happened? Yeah, probably that happened. Are we saying that happened? Yeah, that happened. All right, cool. That doesn't happen. That we're saying that one doesn't happen. Yeah, cool. We got it.
Speaking of Atlantis, have you watched the latest? I'm sorry, well, not the latest one. Randall Carlson's recently been on Joe Rogan, and apparently James Cameron has taken a great interest in his and Graham Hancock's works. And Randall Carlson has theorized a position for where Atlantis could have been, and James Cameron wants to do a dive, apparently.
Wow. Interesting. I've just got South Park.
Yeah, James Cameron looking for Atlantis based on the work of Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock. Fucking bring that one on.
Man, what a peculiar world we live in. Like there's a South Park episode where the collective bar of society is lowered, and James Cameron has to go down into the ocean to raise the bar, and it's just like, it's mental that then if he took on that project and they actually found Atlantis and it just kind of rewrote human history, it's mental that would actually raise the bar in society, because then all of a sudden we'd again have hope instead of this narrative of, well, this one race or this one group or this one arbitrary collective group of individuals did X, Y, Z. It's like, no, it's everything that is the story of everyone that has been. It is. And
it all took place on a tiny little blue dot.
Yeah, man. Yeah. And again, it's, I think the wonderful thing of the prevalence of cannabis, of psychedelics, is that they give us an opportunity to have what the astronauts called the overview effect, which is that when they got into the stratosphere and you turned and you saw everything that ever has been, ever will be, ever could be, everything there's ever been for as far as humanity is concerned is there, and you are not currently part of it. To have that abstract experience, I think that's why substances like DMT and LSD are very powerful things, to be able to allow us to separate from our senses, or on the other side to become so synesthesic with them that we experience life in such a detached way from our egos that we understand that kings and hierarchy and monarchy and democracy and everything else are absurdities. They're attempts at us trying to define and refine and confine the divine, the chaotic nature of the unknown. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I quite like the chaotic nature of the unknown. I mean, I find it very strange to deal with people who can't deal with change, because for me, life changes every day. That's part of the beauty of life.
Yeah, I think which version of, I'm sorry for the Buddhists out there, one of the schools of Buddhist thought, their Buddha, because obviously there's a few different interpretations to this, basically said that the human body is made up of things. I think it's called Galapagos, or these particles, these millions of particles, and that we accumulate at the start of day and we dissipate at the end of day. And every day we reformulate within this birth cycle, that every day you have this new day ahead of you, in that quite new agey sort of concept. But it is this idea that everything is what it is in front of you. Anything that's been previous or ahead of you is speculation. Behind you is will change with time. That was creepy. But yeah, and I think that to me, that when I learned that many years ago was a really I get it. So I'm carrying the trauma into each day. I'm carrying this. Well, I can't do this today because I couldn't do it yesterday. Do you know what I mean? And this self-limiting prophecy.
Yeah, I get that one all too well, right? Especially at the minute.
Yeah, I think that's understandable.
Yeah, you better watch your time because you've got a call to be taken shortly.
Indeed, forever sitting in front of this bloody screen. I suppose
it's what happens when you get gassing, man. You cannot help yourself.
I know, I'm seemingly making a career out of talking shit. But yeah, at least some of you fine people out there are listening. Yeah, it seems to be. Seems to be people enjoy it. So as long as there is an audience and an appetite, or even if there isn't, to be honest, I'll be sat having these conversations forever, because even if we do get the ultimate win and things actually really meaningfully change, we'll be set with a whole new version of challenges and corruptions. And
I've got no doubt, because the powers that be can't have people like me and you raising ourselves because they like to be they've got to lord it over us. We have to be serfs.
Yeah, I think I'm slowly realizing what my ultimate fight is in life. It's for class mobility, or at least, or is it the least, but ideally an erosion of classism. And I think that's where my fight is. It just happens to manifest in drugs right now.
We all want that Star Trek future, but it's the powers that be don't want us to have it.
Yeah, well, I think everything that we've kind of discussed with cannabis is a technology and a resource. I mean, it's before even thinking of the application of mycelium and mushrooms and other.
As you've said before, mate, all of this lot, it's all capitalist industries, but it's got so much benefit for all. It's got a socialist agenda.
Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating because the capitalist imperative is kind of fabricated on scarcity, and cannabis unrestrained is antithetical to scarcity. It is abundance.
Exactly.
Capacity.
It's a resource that can create abundance in a system of debt-based scarcity is an aberration.
Not only is it an aberration, it is actively a threat. It is a form of, as they would consider, terrorism and a threat to their economy.
Exactly. This is why it's the economic argument. A part of it is economic terrorism. Yeah,
it really is. It really is. So it's economic terrorism and social control. And I think I'm going to ask you the last question, hopefully, so we don't leave this on too much of a downer. Because I mean, there's still hope to be found in all of this, I suppose, folks. That awareness is the first step towards any change, and I think I am grateful for how open you have been with you going through this process, not just to myself but to the public at large, and helping inform others that for all the system is skewed, there's still potentially ways that we can challenge this.
Yeah, and I still think that the best way to do that is to go after the coppers personally through civil cases, go and take the O.J. Simpson approach to justice. I think it's the only way we're going to do it.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed for that.
I will say that I'm a little bit pessimistic about that as well, considering how badly the system is fixed already.
Yeah, it does seem that if you were to design a system to prevent people from challenging the laws, you wouldn't allow there to be a mechanism for people to challenge said laws. And if then you could put together a civil claim, it's then whether anybody would represent it, as to whether then the institutions themselves would allow it to come to trial. And that is, I think, is an issue here. There's also then how large of a bullseye you could potentially paint on your back by doing so.
Well, yeah, I mean, I remember Phil Berryman commented on one repost not so long ago about how he had put this case over to his barrister, and his barrister hadn't, from the sounds of it, I think he recognises the case, recognises that there is a case there, but didn't come back to him.
Well, this is it. I think that a lot of people now in different law firms around the country and people in law as a profession are starting to then look at the next level of this. That, okay, what happens if then cannabis is suddenly lawful in the UK? If then there's none of these possession charges, these cultivation, and there's a lot of law firms that have basically made a careers out of just charging drug charges, defending people on drug charges. You know, it's
they've all made themselves part of that criminal conspiracy.
Yeah, but
Criminal Act 1977 says you don't have to knowingly be part of a conspiracy to be considered part of a conspiracy.
But
we know this is a criminal conspiracy of fraud and terrorism. So at some point they're going to be held accountable by the people that they've helped criminalise.
I'd like to think so. And then if it was then done in the right way, they would then go after the prosecution services. They would then go after people in power. But this is the argument that if police were actually here to serve justice blindly, they would be raiding Parliament.
Yeah.
So it just, it's hard not to be pessimistic about the chances of developing such a case and being able to actually try it in a way that would lead to a positive outcome and set a precedent for a route to just basically put the officers on blast to be aware that you are legally responsible for your actions when making arrests.
They are. The Police Federation have already said that each and every officer is an independent legal entity.
Wonder how many of the officers know that when they're running around all gung-ho, playing good guy.
Exactly.
All right, well, let's wrap this up because, like I say, I've got another call. Final question they ask really everyone. What does the future hold for you? It's been a year since we spoke to you. We've kind of caught up on that. Where do you think we'll be when we speak to you next year?
I have no idea. Honestly, I don't know where I fit into all of this right now, and I don't know what to do with it all. So I'm just going to go with the flow and see what happens.
Yeah, I think it's a healthy approach to it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I appreciate that. Well, like I said, I really appreciate you taking the time and catching us up with everything that's happened. It is, I say, deeply frustrating that the outcome went the way it did in terms of them forcing you into a guilty plea. But I think the what the hell is it called? The punishment, I guess, is the best outcome that could have been. No,
pretty much. I think I've done all right to get it suspended and only 156 quid for 75 plants, but still at the same time, to know beyond a reasonable doubt that I've been defrauded and terrorized and all the rest of it it's angering, it's frustrating, I'm sure there's plenty of people listening to this who will know exactly how it feels.
Yeah, unfortunately so. And I think that's why it's so important that we share these narratives and these stories and these conversations, and we try and find truth. We know the truth. We try and find ways to project that truth and show that truth to the people that can actually make some fucking change, because something has to change. They can't.
It has to come down to the coppers. They have to simply start doing the job.
Yeah, man.
Instead of just following orders, do the job.
That's a big call to arms, as it were, a call to action rather. So I don't know. I do hope that it doesn't fall on deaf ears, but I highly doubt we've got any police officers within my listening ranks. That's my hope as well. To be fair, is that in some small way we can nullify the law. If the law can't change because the politics is corrupt, we can at least try and figure out how to get the police to understand the truth. And the truth is that
you're just following orders and you're not doing your bloody job. It's as simple as that.
Indeed. So,
and not only that, you're all getting stitched up because in 2014, David Cameron, George Osborne put the black market for sex and drugs on the figures for the economy. The value of that market at £10 billion. Obviously, the people who work in those black markets don't pay taxes. So what they did was to treat those taxes like car insurance payments. everybody accepts that we pay a certain amount of our car insurance payments for uninsured drivers. Now everybody pays a certain amount of their income taxes to pay for taxes missed from the black market, which includes the police, whose council taxes are just about to go up for 5% to pay for cuts to the police. So they're contributing towards their own pay cut to go out and repress a multi-billion-pound industry that each and every one of them are paying income taxes for. Almost makes you feel sorry for them.
Yeah, I mean, they're also then destabilizing economies, local communities, etc. It's
Exactly.
Yeah, it's hard to state, but again, unfortunately, a lot of people are victims of this, even the oppressors to some extent. So yeah, I think that's a good point to end on. Yeah, thank you very much, Trev. Really appreciate you taking the time. Obviously, I will see you soon. Obviously, we'll get you back on the podcast before too long, although it probably will end up being another 12 months, how fast time is flying by. But I do hope that a lot has changed and that you have found a comfortable place within the industry that you're happy with and you can see a future.
Thank you very much, man.
All right. Well, yeah, I'll speak to you very soon. Folks, if you've enjoyed this, please do check us out on patreon.com/Simpa Life, where you can help keep the lights on this little project, as well as getting exclusive access to blogs and episodes of the podcast. Check us out on all social media platforms at Simpa Life. I'll be back next week with the legend that is Mr. Tommy Chong. Then we've got Dana Larson coming up, and I've just confirmed, but I'm not going to announce who it is, a sitting MP. Ooh, this will be quite an interesting conversation I'll be having in early April. So do check it out. Please do like, share, subscribe, rate on various podcast platforms, and yeah, just generally help me grow the show if you've enjoyed this. Thanks, folks. Peace and love. Check you next week.